Behind the closed door of their bedroom, in the dark hours when no one can witness their breakdown, the avoidant is crying. Not the controlled, dignified tears that might earn sympathy or signal temporary sadness. These are the ugly, desperate tears that come from somewhere deep and primal, the kind that shake their entire body, the kind that make breathing difficult, the kind that reveal a pain so profound it can no longer be intellectualized or minimized or explained away. This is the secret the avoidant guards more fiercely than any other. They are capable of devastating emotional pain. They are breaking under the weight of their own choices, and they are drowning in regret so intense it physically hurts. Everything they've shown you, the indifference, the casual detachment, the ease with which they created distance, all of it was performance. A carefully constructed facade designed to protect them from the very vulnerability they're now experiencing alone in the dark. And what they never wanted you to know is that letting you go didn't bring relief or freedom. It brought a grief so complete it's dismantling everything they thought they knew about themselves. The avoidance tears aren't just about losing you. They're about confronting the pattern that has defined their entire relational life. Every person they've pushed away, every connection they've sabotaged, every moment of genuine intimacy they've fled from. All of it is crashing over them now in waves of recognition. They're crying for the accumulated loss of years, maybe decades, of running from the very thing they desperately wanted. They're grieving not just this relationship, but every relationship they destroyed through the same fear-based patterns. And underneath all of that grief is a terror that's finally surfaced. What if they're incapable of love? What if their wiring is so damaged that they'll spend their entire life pushing away anyone who gets close? What if you were their last chance and they've blown it? The regret the avoidant feels is multidimensional and relentless. It's not simple regret about a few bad decisions. It's a comprehensive mourning of who they could have been with you versus who their fear forced them to be. They regret every time they pulled away when you reached for them. They regret every conversation they cut short because it was getting too real. They regret every plan they sabotaged and every moment of connection they minimized. They regret the walls they built, and the tests they administered, and the hoops they made you jump through just to receive the bare minimum of emotional availability. The accumulation of these regrets is crushing them. What the avoidant never wanted you to know is that they were aware of what they were doing even as they did it. They weren't oblivious to their patterns. Some part of them recognized they were hurting you, pushing you away, sabotaging something good. But the awareness didn't translate into different behavior because their fear was stronger than their consciousness. They watched themselves destroy the relationship like a bystander to their own life, knowing it was happening but unable to stop the mechanisms that drove them toward distance and safety. This awareness makes the regret even more painful because they can't claim ignorance. They knew, and they did it anyway. The weight of their performance. The avoidant is crying because maintaining the performance of indifference was exhausting in ways they could never admit. Every time they acted unbothered by your absence, they were internally screaming. Every time they played it cool when you reached out, their heart was racing with relief and joy they couldn't express. Every time they created distance, they wanted to close it but couldn't let themselves. The gap between what they felt and what they showed was a chasm that required constant energy to maintain. And now that it's over, now that they've lost you, the performance feels like the cruelest joke they've ever played on themselves. They're crying because they remember specific moments where they could have been honest, where they could have dropped the act and told you how much you mattered. The time you asked if they cared about you, and they shrugged casually when they wanted to scream, "Yes, more than I know how to handle." The time you tried to define the relationship, and they deflected when they wanted to claim you completely. The time you were vulnerable, and they responded with cold logic when they wanted to match your vulnerability with their own. Every one of these moments is playing in their mind now like a highlight reel of their own emotional cowardice. The performance also required them to minimize you constantly. They had to tell themselves you weren't that special, that the connection wasn't that deep, that they could find someone else easily. These lies were necessary to maintain their detachment, but now they're confronting the reality that you were special, that the connection was rare, that they won't find it again because what you offered wasn't just about compatibility. It was about your willingness to see them clearly and love them anyway, a willingness they exploited and then destroyed. The regret of minimizing something precious is eating them alive. The avoidant is also crying because they're exhausted from years of performing strength they didn't feel. They've spent so long pretending they didn't need anyone, that they were fine alone, that relationships were optional add-ons to an already complete life. This performance wasn't just for you, it was for everyone, for their friends, their family, themselves. And maintaining it required suppressing every natural human need for connection, intimacy, belonging. Now, in the aftermath of losing you, they're feeling the accumulated weight of all that suppression. The tears are decades overdue, the truth about their fear. What the avoidant never wanted you to know is that their fear of intimacy isn't rational or proportional, or something they can simply overcome through willpower. It's a visceral, overwhelming terror that takes over their entire nervous system when someone gets too close. When you tried to deepen the connection, when you wanted more consistency or commitment or emotional presence, their body responded as if they were in physical danger. Heart racing, palms sweating, an overwhelming urge to flee that felt like survival instinct. This wasn't them being difficult or playing games. This was genuine panic that they had no idea how to communicate. They're crying now because they're ashamed of this fear. They judge themselves for it, see it as weakness, hate that they can't just be normal about relationships. They watch other people commit easily, express love freely, build intimate partnerships without this paralyzing terror, and they feel fundamentally broken. The shame of their fear has been almost as damaging as the fear itself. It's prevented them from seeking help, from being honest about their struggles, from explaining to you what was really happening when they pulled away. The avoidant is also crying because they're realizing their fear cost them the one thing that could have helped heal it. You created safety in ways they've never experienced. You were patient with their pace. You accepted their need for space. You didn't punish them for their limitations. You offered exactly the kind of secure, non-threatening love that avoidant attachment styles need to begin healing. And they were too afraid to receive it. They rejected the medicine because they were terrified of needing it. The irony is devastating. They never wanted you to know how much they hated themselves for their fear. How many times they lay awake after pushing you away, disgusted with their own behavior. How often they gave themselves harsh internal lectures about needing to do better, be braver, push through the discomfort. How desperately they wanted to be different, but had no idea how to actually change patterns wired into them from childhood. The self-loathing that accompanies their avoidance is something they've hidden carefully, but it's been there all along, corroding their sense of self-worth, the loneliness they denied. The avoidant is crying because the loneliness they've been running from their entire life has finally caught up with them, and it's unbearable. They told themselves they preferred solitude, that they were complete on their own, that other people were complications they didn't need. But losing you has shattered these comfortable lies. The loneliness isn't peaceful or chosen or empowering. It's hollow and aching and relentless. It follows them through every day, a constant awareness that they're fundamentally alone in ways that feel increasingly permanent. What they never wanted you to know is that even when you were together, even when they were creating distance and acting unbothered, they felt lonely. Lonely because they couldn't let you all the way in. Lonely because they were always holding parts of themselves back. Lonely because they were watching genuine connection happen from behind their walls, participating partially while longing to participate fully. The loneliest they've ever been was when they were with you but unable to truly be with you because of their fear. They're crying because they're recognizing a pattern across their entire life. They've been lonely in every relationship. Lonely in their family because they learned early to suppress their needs. Lonely with friends because they never fully trust anyone with their inner world. Lonely in romance because they can't sustain the vulnerability intimacy requires. The loneliness isn't circumstantial, it's structural. It's built into how they relate to people. And this recognition is terrifying because it suggests that no matter who enters their life, no matter how perfect the person might be, they'll still end up lonely because they can't let anyone truly reach them. The avoidant never wanted you to know that your presence actually made them feel less alone than they'd ever felt. Not because you fixed their loneliness, but because you created moments where the walls came down slightly and they glimpsed what connection could feel like. Those glimpses were precious and terrifying in equal measure. Precious because they were so rare. Terrifying because they revealed how much the avoidant was missing, how deep their isolation actually went, how desperately they wanted what they were simultaneously pushing away. The fantasy of return. The avoidant is crying because they're trapped in an endless loop of fantasizing about you coming back and knowing it probably won't happen. They imagine scenarios where you reach out, where you give them another chance, where somehow you haven't moved on and are still willing to try. These fantasies are detailed and consuming. They rehearse what they would say differently, how they would show up better, what they would do to prove they've changed. In their mind, they're already the partner they should have been all along, and the relationship is working beautifully. But these fantasies are torture because the avoidant knows they're probably just that, fantasies. You have every reason to stay gone. You've already given them chances they wasted. You've already extended patience they exploited. You've already offered love they rejected. Why would you come back? The avoidant is crying because they want something they have no right to ask for and probably won't receive. They want your forgiveness without having earned it. They want your presence without having done the work to deserve it. They want to undo the past without having transformed themselves in the present. What they never wanted you to know is how often they almost reach out, how many messages they've typed and deleted, how many times they've hovered over your contact, wanting to call, stopping themselves at the last second. The restraint isn't because they don't care. It's because they're paralyzed by shame and fear. Shame about their behavior. Fear of your rejection. The combination keeps them frozen, wanting desperately to reconnect, but unable to overcome the barriers their own psychology has created. The avoidant is also crying because they know that even if you did come back, they might repeat the same patterns. The fear that drove them away hasn't magically disappeared. The attachment wiring that makes intimacy feel dangerous hasn't been rewired. They're terrified that they'd get a second chance and waste it the same way they wasted the first. This awareness makes them feel hopeless. If they can't change and they can't be happy alone, what's left? The question haunts them, the reality of their loss. The tears come hardest when the avoidant allows themselves to fully feel what they've lost. Not the abstract concept of losing a relationship, but the specific, concrete reality of losing you. They've lost your laugh, the one that always surprised them and made them smile despite themselves. They've lost your way of seeing them, which was somehow both clearer and kinder than how they see themselves. They've lost the specific comfort of your presence, the way their nervous system would calm slightly when you were near, even as their mind was screaming danger. They're crying because they've lost the future they didn't let themselves acknowledge they wanted. The casual domesticity that terrified them, but also appealed to something deep and unspoken. The possibility of building something real with someone who actually understood them. The chance to have a partner who would be patient with their growth and celebrate their progress. All of it is gone, not because it wasn't possible, but because they were too afraid to reach for it. What the avoidant never wanted you to know is that they've lost their sense of themselves in losing you. You reflected back to them a version of themselves that was better than they usually felt. More lovable, more interesting, more worthy. Without your gaze, without your appreciation, without your belief in them, they're back to seeing themselves through their own harsh, critical eyes. And what they see is someone fundamentally damaged and alone. The loss of you is also the loss of the better self they were becoming in your presence. They're crying because they understand now that you weren't trying to trap them or control them or take away their freedom. You were offering partnership. You were inviting them into something beautiful that they interpreted as threatening. Their fear painted you as dangerous when you were actually safe. Their wounds made them see imprisonment where you were offering expansion. The misperception is heartbreaking because it means they destroyed something good while believing they were protecting themselves from something bad. The shame no one sees. The avoidant is drowning in shame that they will never express to another person. Shame about their emotional limitations. Shame about hurting you. Shame about being unable to change even when they could see the harm they were causing. Shame about being the villain in the story when they desperately wanted to be the hero. This shame is corrosive and isolating. It prevents them from seeking help or being honest about their struggles. It keeps them locked in patterns they hate, because admitting the patterns would mean facing the shame they've been avoiding. They never wanted you to know that they judge themselves more harshly than you ever could. Every criticism you might level at them, they've already screamed at themselves internally. Every disappointment you felt, they felt it about themselves tenfold. Every moment they let you down, they experienced it as confirmation of their deepest fear, that they're unlovable, broken, incapable of sustaining the connections that make life meaningful. The avoidant is crying because the shame has nowhere to go. They can't talk about it without revealing vulnerabilities they've spent their life hiding. They can't process it without help they're too ashamed to seek. So it sits inside them, heavy and toxic, adding to the weight of their isolation. The tears are the only release they have, and even those have to happen in private, in the dark, where no one will witness the breakdown of the person who's supposed to have it all together, the hope they're afraid to hold. Despite everything, despite the tears and the regret and the overwhelming sense of loss, there's a tiny, fragile hope that the avoidant is carrying. Hope that maybe it's not too late. Hope that maybe you'll reach out. Hope that maybe they can still change and prove it. Hope that maybe this pain will be the catalyst that finally forces them to do the work they've been avoiding. This hope is terrifying because hoping means caring, and caring means being vulnerable to devastation. The avoidant is crying because they don't know if they're capable of the transformation that hope requires. They've tried before to be different, to be better, and they've always ended up back in the same patterns. What if this time is no different? What if they're fundamentally incapable of secure attachment? What if the hope they're clinging to is just setting them up for more pain? These questions make the tears flow harder because hope feels both essential and dangerous. What they never wanted you to know is that losing you has made them want to change in ways nothing else ever has. Not therapy they half-heartedly attempted. Not self-help books they read but never applied. Not previous relationships that ended with them feeling relieved rather than devastated. You've created in them a genuine desire for transformation, born not from pressure, but from the devastating recognition of what their patterns cost them. Whether that desire translates into actual change remains uncertain, but the wanting is real and overwhelming and completely new. The avoidant is crying in their solitude, experiencing the full force of emotions they've spent their life avoiding, carrying regrets they can't share and pain they can't process, hoping for redemption they're not sure they deserve. And the saddest part, the part they would never want you to know, is that they're doing all of this alone, locked in the exact isolation their fear was supposed to protect them from. Finally feeling everything they were running from, and discovering that the thing they feared most, vulnerability and need and heartbreak, is nothing compared to the emptiness of having pushed away the one person who made them believe they could be different. The avoidant is crying in their solitude, experiencing the full force of emotions they've spent their life avoiding, carrying regrets they can't share and pain they can't process, hoping for redemption they're not sure they deserve. And the saddest part, the part they would never want you to know, is that they're doing all of this alone, locked in the exact isolation their fear was supposed to protect them from. Finally feeling everything they were running from, and discovering that the thing they feared most, vulnerability and need and heartbreak, is nothing compared to the emptiness of having pushed away the one person who made them believe they could be different. The tears keep coming because the avoidant is realizing that their protective mechanisms didn't actually protect them from anything. They built walls to avoid pain, and now they're experiencing pain anyway, but with the added agony of knowing they inflicted it on themselves. They created distance to prevent abandonment, and they ended up abandoned anyway, but through their own actions rather than someone else's choice. They withheld vulnerability to stay safe, and now they're shattered anyway, but without the comfort that comes from having truly tried. Every defense mechanism they employed has failed spectacularly, leaving them with both the pain they tried to avoid and the additional suffering of self-inflicted loss. What the avoidant never wanted you to know is that in their lowest moments, they compose entire speeches to you in their mind. Apologies so detailed and heartfelt that they address every hurt, every confusion, every moment of pain they caused. Explanations that finally illuminate what was happening beneath their cold exterior. Promises about who they could become if given another chance. These mental speeches are eloquent and honest in ways they could never be when you were actually present. The cruel irony is that they finally found the words now that no one is listening. They finally accessed the emotional honesty that could have saved the relationship now that the relationship is beyond saving. The avoidant cries harder when they think about the version of themselves they showed you versus the version that existed beneath the surface. You saw someone distant and uncommitted. But beneath that performance was someone who thought about you constantly, who felt a warmth in their chest when your name appeared on their phone, who secretly loved the mundane rituals you tried to build together even as they sabotaged them. You saw someone who didn't care enough. But the truth they never revealed is that they cared so much it terrified them. The intensity of their feelings was exactly what triggered their withdrawal. They didn't leave because you didn't matter. They left because you mattered too much. And mattering that much to someone felt like handing them a weapon that could destroy them. They never wanted you to know that their coldest moments were often their most desperate. When they were most dismissive, they were fighting the hardest against their desire to pull you close and never let go. When they were most distant, they were battling the overwhelming urge to surrender completely to the connection. Their cruelty was fear in disguise. Their indifference was protection against the tidal wave of emotion they couldn't handle. You interpreted their behavior as lack of care, and that interpretation makes sense from the outside. But from the inside, it was the opposite. It was caring so much that their entire system went into emergency shutdown mode. The avoidant is crying because they're finally understanding that you deserve to know this. You deserve to see the truth beneath their defenses. You deserve to be let into the internal struggle they were experiencing. You deserved a partner who could articulate their fear instead of weaponizing it against you. The regret of having hidden their truth from you is compounded by the recognition that hiding it didn't even serve its purpose. They thought concealing their vulnerability would keep them safe. Instead, it cost them everything. In the darkness, as the tears continue to fall, the avoidant is experiencing something they've never allowed themselves before: complete emotional honesty with themselves. They're not minimizing or intellectualizing or dismissing their feelings. They're just feeling them. The grief, the regret, the shame, the longing, all of it is washing over them without filter or defense. It's excruciating, but it's also strangely clarifying. For the first time in their life, they're not running from their own heart. What they never wanted you to know is that this breakdown might be the most honest they've ever been. Not honest with you because you're not there to witness it, but honest with themselves about what they want, what they've lost, what they're afraid of, what they need to change. The tears are not just grief. They're also the breaking open of something that's been sealed shut for decades. They're the first crack in the armor that might eventually lead to real transformation. Or they might just be tears, the temporary release of pressure before the avoidant rebuilds their walls and returns to their familiar patterns, having learned nothing except to guard their heart even more carefully next time. But in this moment, in the privacy of their pain, the avoidant is completely undone. They're experiencing the full weight of their choices and their limitations. They're feeling the consequences of a lifetime of running from connection. They're crying for you, for themselves, for every relationship they've destroyed, for the intimacy they've never been able to sustain, for the love they don't know how to receive. And the most devastating realization of all, the one that makes the tears flow until they have nothing left, is this: they finally understand what it means to lose someone irreplaceable, and the understanding came too late to prevent the loss. They know now what they should have known then, and the knowledge is worthless without the opportunity to apply it. The avoidant is broken open by regret, drowning in tears no one will see, learning lessons that have no application, understanding themselves fully only after they've lost the one person who made them want to be understood.